Welcome everyone to the first webinar in MentorAbility Canada's national series. My name is Belinda Dienick and I'll be your host. This series is focused on the evolution of inclusion in our Canadian workforce. While the concepts of diversity and inclusion speak to many important groups of people, our national series is focused on Canadian citizens who experience a disability. Our series will offer free webinars from August 2020 right through to January 2021. These webinars are designed for employers, human resources staff, employment support specialists, and job seekers who experience disability. We will cover a broad array of topics, from practical strategies and policies around how to design an inclusive workforce to thoughtful conversations around where we are really at with inclusion in Canada. During each webinar, we'll be joined by an expert speaker or a thought leader who will share their insights, tips, and resources. Thank you for taking time to join us today. We have over 250 people registered from coast to coast. You will note that you're muted. This has happened in order for us to allow the best sound quality for all participants. If you have a question, we definitely want to hear it. Please share your question by clicking on the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We have set aside time to address many of these questions later in the webinar. However, feel free to add them at any point during the presentation. Thanks is extended to Jeanette and Krista, who are providing our ASL interpretation today, and Shanti, who is working on providing closed captioning. Special thanks is extended to Suanne Miedema, our expert guest speaker today. I've had the pleasure of working with Suanne, and I'm always appreciative of her knowledge and expertise. To get things rolling, I would like to introduce you to today's co-host, Joanna Good. Joanna is Executive Director of the Canadian Association for Supported Employment, and she'll share some information around our organization and MentorAbility Canada initiative.
Thanks, Belinda, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm really happy to be here with all of you today on behalf of the Canadian Association for Supported Employment. This year, CASE is celebrating our 25th year as a member-driven organization, working with supported employment organizations and employers to increase employment inclusion for Canadians who experience disability. In 2019, CASE launched the MentorAbility Canada initiative, a national initiative to enhance the economic and social well-being of people experiencing a disability and to support employers to increase their knowledge about building an inclusive workforce. This webinar series, hosted through CASE's MentorAbility Canada initiative, is one of the ways that we support employers and service providers to strengthen and diversify Canada's workforce. We're pleased to introduce Suanne Miedema with Miedema Board Consulting. Suanne comes with a wealth of experience in both for-profit and non-profit businesses and organizations. Suanne, I'll pass it over to you to share more information about your background and what you'll be covering today.
Thanks, Joanna, and thanks, Belinda. And thank you also to everyone that's on the call today for your time. My name is Suanne Miedema, and I'm the president of Miedema's Board Consulting, where I help nonprofits with their governance and policies. I'm working with CASE to develop a toolkit for employers, which will be a resource for how to develop the policies and practices you need to create an inclusive workplace. We will be launching the toolkit this fall, so please watch for it. In the meantime, just by participating in today's webinar, you are already taking a step in the direction of creating an inclusive workplace. While this webinar has been designed with employers in mind, whether you are a business owner, manager, employee with a disability, job seeker, employment service provider, family member, or you have some other role in supported employment, today's session will help you better understand the foundational building blocks of creating an inclusive workplace and how to put them into practice. Before I begin, just a few things about me. Before I started my consultancy, I was the general manager of a retail furniture chain for about 10 years. And having worked my way up through sales and store management, I understand the pressures of running a business. I have also studied business in university, and I have an undergrad and an MBA. So I understand how business and inclusivity should work in theory. As we all know, theory and reality can be two different things. So today I'll be trying to bridge those gaps as we work together to create a more inclusive workplace. As we are going along, if you identify a gap, please put it in the Q&A or ask about it during our question and answer session so that we can make this session as practical and helpful as possible. On a personal note, I have a brother-in-law with disabilities, and my father-in-law had ALS for the last 7 years of his life. So I have a personal interest in seeing a world where everyone belongs. Everyone is accepted for their unique set of gifts, and everyone has equal access to life, which includes the opportunity to participate in the workforce. Next slide, please. So this is our session outline for today. We've got a lot to cover, so we'll be moving quickly to ensure there is plenty of time for questions and answers at the end. Our goal for today is to put in place a company-wide inclusivity initiative that encourages respect and recognition of all employees. So how do you do that? The base layer of the foundation is the business case, the culture, and the legal context. So we'll be touching briefly on each of those. If you don't have those in place, the other pieces that you'll be building on top can crumble easily and frustrate or discourage you. Once we've got the foundation laid out, we'll be looking at creating an inclusivity statement, accessibility, job descriptions, and job postings. At the end, before we wrap up with some practical tips on how to get started and our Q&A, I will touch briefly on accommodation plans because they are a key element of inclusivity. But I won't be spending a lot of time on that topic in this webinar because we've got an entire webinar on that topic coming up in 2 weeks. As each of these pieces come together, you'll be creating the inclusive workplace that will attract your inclusive workforce. And just as a teaser, each of these topics that we are covering today, along with several more, are covered in greater detail in the Employer Toolkit that CASE is launching in November. Next slide, please. So the first building block in our foundation is understanding the business case. Creating an inclusive workplace is not about charity, tokenism, or doing your part for society. If you are building your inclusive workplace on any of those notions, it is highly likely that you will fail. Inclusive hiring is about accessing the right talent for your business and matching the skills people offer with jobs that need to get done. To put it plainly, we are talking about real jobs for real pay, not about creating jobs for people with disabilities. People with disabilities offer skills, talents, and abilities that will benefit your workplace. In many cases, these will be the exact same skills, talents, and abilities that people without disabilities will bring to your workplace. And in some cases, they will bring even more, because when you live with a disability, you often develop skills such as perseverance, determination, goal setting, creativity, resilience, and resourcefulness, just to name a few. As an added benefit, hiring people with disabilities can bring out the best in everyone, regardless of whether or not they have a disability. On this slide, I've got just some of the statistically verified benefits of hiring people with disabilities and having an inclusive and accessible workplace. There are lots of online stats on this subject, but for the sake of simplicity, I'm going to just use the ones from a Conference Board of Canada report called Business Benefits of Accessible Workplaces. The report can be found on the Conference Board of Canada website, and the link to the report is posted in the chat box. You're also welcome to email me after, and I'll send you the report and any other statistics that you might be interested in. The Conference Board report states that by creating an inclusive workplace, you will gain access to a growing consumer market, estimated at 3.8 million Canadians, or 13.7% of the population, identified themselves as having a disability in 2012, and this is a growing trend. By 2017, this number was up to 1 in 5, or 22% of the Canadian population, age 15 and older. That's about 6.2 million individuals. One of the benefits of living in a society where we have a long life expectancy is that we can all expect to experience disability at some point in our lives. So most of us will end up in this statistic at some point. An inclusive workplace will make it easier and more attractive for this growing consumer segment to use your business services while giving you some insider information on how to meet the needs. You will also gain access to an underutilized talent pool, rich with the skills, talents, and abilities I mentioned earlier. When you factor in those who have given up looking for a job, there is estimated to be a 70%, that's 70% unemployment rate among people with disabilities. If you've ever struggled to find the right talent for your business, you may be missing a large and untapped labor pool. Next is that inclusive workplaces enjoy better job retention. In organizations with accessible employment practices, staff retention has been proven to be up to 72% higher among people with disabilities. This means you'll have lower turnover of staff. A study out of the US says that turnover can be reduced by 20 to 30% compared to other labor pools, and the costs associated with turnover, such as training time, loss of productivity, overtime for other staff, human resources, and payroll time, are decreased. Next on the list is higher attendance records. A DuPont Corporation study found that 85% of its employees with disabilities rated average or above on attendance. An IT&T survey found that the workers with disabilities had fewer absences than their coworkers. Next is better safety records. An Australian survey of employers reported that the number of health and safety incidents was 6 times lower for employees with disabilities than for other employees. 20 years of surveys by DuPont clearly show that employees with disabilities meet or exceed the safety and attendance records of their coworkers. The Conference Board report also has links to several studies that prove inclusive organizations have more engaged and therefore more productive employees. This is by no means an exhaustive list, but it gives you a sense of the real business benefits of an inclusive workplace and why hiring someone with a disability is not about charity or tokenism. Next slide, please. The second building block of our foundation is the culture of your workplace. I am creating a policy toolkit for employers to use to ensure your business practices are inclusive on paper. But to make a play on the well-known saying, culture eats strategy for breakfast, culture eats policies for breakfast. Having inclusive hiring policies will be ineffective if top management does not set the tone. In other words, if you are a franchise manager, you'll need the buy-in from your franchise owner if you want to create an inclusive workplace. Why? The tone from the top has to be consistent. Do your current employees feel like they are appreciated, included, and listened to? If not, then it is unlikely that someone with a disability will feel welcome either. And it will be highly unlikely that your inclusion efforts will succeed. Set the tone from the top and train your staff regularly on how to be welcoming and inclusive. This does not have to be formal training. It can be as simple as a lunchroom discussion or how you react when you see a behavior or attitude that is inconsistent with an inclusive workplace. Keep the focus on integration versus segregation. Sometimes equal outcomes require different treatment. One employer I spoke with, who is a trailblazer for inclusivity in the grocery sector, told me he achieved this shift in attitudes and behavior by giving extra responsibilities to the most engaged staff. He would ask them to be a buddy for a new employee or take a lead on a role when something needed to be done or communicated. It did not happen overnight, but he found that over time, the employees that enjoyed the inclusive workplace stayed and excelled, while the employees with bad attitudes and negative behaviors left. As an added bonus, the shifting of attitudes and behaviors will improve your business's customer service as well. Next slide, please. The final building block of our foundation is understanding your local legislation and which laws and regulations apply. Some employers are afraid of hiring someone with a disability because they think they will open themselves up to legal issues. The vast majority of employers in Canada are subject to the human rights legislation in the province or provinces in which their employees work. A smaller number of employers, such as banks, airlines, and railways, are subject only to the federal employment legislation, such as the Canada Human Rights Act. Every province has their own version of a human rights code and an employment or a labor code. These are quite similar across provinces, and disability is a protected status in all provinces. Many provinces are also in the process of developing an Accessibility Act. For example, in Ontario, there are 3 pieces of legislation employers need to be familiar with: the Ontario Human Rights Code, the Employment Standards Act, and the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act, or AODA. The legislation in other provinces will have similar names. Legislation across the country is changing at a rapid pace. At least it's a rapid pace when it comes to legislation. The laws are shifting to protect and advocate for people with disabilities, so it is good to check regularly for any changes to your business, in your business area, and for the size of your business, because in some provinces, the expectations can change based on the number of employees you have. By knowing and understanding your local legislation, you'll be more confident about your rights, the rights of your employees, and how to protect your business from costly and time-consuming errors. For example, if a performance problem develops and cannot be resolved, termination may be an appropriate option. The termination process must be handled carefully for all employees, not just those with disabilities, and should be the final step in a well-documented process of progressive discipline. Just to be clear, this process and any other legal aspect of managing employees is no different for people with disabilities than for those without. If you manage this process well with people who do not have a disability, then you are in a great position to handle it well with those that do. If you don't, then this might be a good place to take a step back and understand the rights of your employees. The good news is that you don't need to have to figure this out on your own. Most of you will be in an area where a local employment service partner can help you understand your legal obligations. Next slide, please. So we've got our foundation of understanding the business case, the culture, and the legal context. One thing you might notice about these 3 is that they all have to do with perspectives and attitudes. If you ask anyone who works in the disability community, they'll tell you that attitudes and misperceptions are the biggest barrier to people with disabilities entering the workplace. Those are the toughest things for us as individuals to change and the hardest things to change in a workplace. The rest of what we're going to cover will be easy in comparison. Onto our foundational building block, we are now going to build our inclusivity framework. The first part of the framework is to develop an inclusivity statement. An inclusivity statement is a public statement that expresses your organization's promise and commitment to inclusion. It can be as simple as 1 sentence or a couple of short sentences. It should summarize what you believe and why. Keep in mind that this statement also has to be plausible. It is not the time to use a lot of jargon or broad statements that are not likely to be achieved. Keep it simple and realistic. Your inclusivity statement communicates your business's values, which lets prospective job seekers and potential customers know if they align with the company. Many job seekers, those that experience disabilities as well as those who do not, are looking at a company's culture and values before applying, so they will be looking for your inclusivity statement. The employment specialists that are on the call with us today often look for an inclusion statement when they are researching a company as a potential fit for their client. And increasingly, consumers are making choices around where they spend their dollars in relation to the culture and values of a company. You can post your inclusivity statement in your hiring ads, on the wall, on your website, in your staff training materials, anywhere you would like to communicate your commitment to inclusivity. Your inclusivity statement will send a broad signal that will appeal to many audiences. The Conference Board report I referenced earlier states that candidates are less likely to apply for employment opportunities with businesses that do not visibly show their commitment to inclusion. If you've got the foundational building blocks we set out in the beginning of this webinar, but don't yet have an inclusivity statement, this is a great place to start. It can be a simple and fun process that does not need to take a lot of time. There are lots of great examples that you can find on the internet to get started, and there will be a few examples in the toolkit. Here's just one example from Microsoft. If you are not familiar with Microsoft's commitment to inclusion, it is worth checking out. They would be considered best in class. When I mentioned earlier about the tone from the top, Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella keeps inclusion as one of his key messages, and it is the focus of most of their business activities. Their public statement is, "Different perspectives help us all to achieve more. Our mission is deeply inclusive. Empower every person and every organization on the planet to achieve more. We expect each of us, no matter what our level, role, or function is, to play an active role in creating environments where people of diverse backgrounds are excited to bring all of who they are and do their best." Next slide, please. Thanks. The next part of the framework is to look for and remove any barriers. Sometimes we think of barriers as just physical obstacles, but that is just one type of barrier. To be sure, physical barriers are definitely something that can and should be addressed. Common physical barriers are steps without ramps and narrow aisles that make it difficult for anyone with a wheelchair, walker, cane, or stroller to navigate. High shelves can be a challenge for people who use wheelchairs, as well as the 6 million Canadians that have a problem with balance at some point in their lives. And poor lighting combined with small type font is a problem for anyone over 40. The good news is that there are lots of organizations eager to help you remove physical barriers. The Rick Hansen Foundation has resources and guides on their website to help you. Organizations like the Canadian National Institute for the Blind and the Ontario Federation for Cerebral Palsy have specific resources and sometimes funding available to address barriers for specific disabilities. And then there are the other kinds of barriers, such as attitudes, policies and procedures, communications, and technology. Attitudes we touched on earlier already in this webinar, so I won't repeat myself here. What we are covering in today's webinar addresses many of the common barriers in policies and procedures, and the Employer Toolkit will help you identify and address even more. Communication barriers can be related to hearing, speaking, reading, writing, understanding, and those who use different ways to communicate. Technology barriers limit life for people with different disabilities. For example, websites that require mouse clicking are a barrier for people who always use keyboard commands instead of a mouse, and are a barrier for people who control their computer through speech. Touchscreens can be barriers for people with limited upper body movement and for people who have visual impairments. As with other elements of building an inclusive workplace, this does not have to happen overnight. During the last federal election, I helped to do accessibility audits for voting locations. It didn't take long to see a pattern. Most buildings over 50 years old had every barrier on my list to watch for. Steps up to the front door, steps down into common rooms, narrow doorways, heavy doors with small door handles, washrooms that were not accessible, and the list went on. Buildings from the 1980s and 90s were better, but often still had at least one barrier that we had to address, such as renting a ramp because there was a step or two at the front entrance, or hiring someone to open the door because the building did not have automatic doors. But any building from the last 20 years or so was a dream. Level entrances, no random steps, automatic doors, accessible washrooms. My point is that even if you can't remove every barrier overnight, you can put in place measures that can eliminate them over time. It is shameful that it took us decades to figure out that you can build barrier-free buildings at no additional cost, just by giving the architects a set of rules to follow. So over time, as you do renovations, create policies, purchase new tools for your business, anything that you update or upgrade in the regular course of business, if you take a moment to consider accessibility as you go along, over time you can help to create a world that is accessible. The other neat thing is that once a space is accessible, you may start to see more people with disabilities. We know from the statistics that they are there, but you might not have noticed them because they haven't been able to access your building, business, or services. One saying adopted by some people with disabilities is, "Nothing about us without us." So ask some people with disabilities to help you identify and solve barriers. They may save you from a lot of overthinking and over-engineering. Again, there are resources available to help you identify and address barriers. You do not need to do this on your own. Next slide, please. The next part of our inclusive workplace framework is to review job descriptions to look for ways to make them more inclusive, addressing and removing any barriers that you might see now with your new perspective. Look closely at the duties, responsibilities, and specifications of a given role and understand what bona fide job requirements are. In other words, is the task essential to the job, or is it optional or flexible? A common example is a requirement to have a driver's license when someone could be given the option to make other transportation arrangements, or the requirement to be able to lift a certain weight when that task is minor or infrequent and could be done by someone else. This job description review could be a great opportunity to take a step back and look at all the roles in your workplace and identify opportunities for job carving, where you create efficiencies by pulling a common task out of several roles and creating a new role that focuses on a specific task or group of tasks. This is a good management exercise for learning how to redistribute tasks if they are not bona fide. Keep the expectations in the job description simple and realistic. Mark Wafer, who will be known to many of you because of his huge success hiring people with disabilities at his Tim Hortons franchises, told me that some people with disabilities will not apply if they don't think they can do the job. He said this is because they don't have the confidence built up in their abilities and are afraid of rejection. So keep the expectations in the job simple and realistic. Going back to our foundational building block of understanding your legal context, it is important to have a comfort level with understanding bona fide job requirements, because a job description that is not inclusive runs the risk of being open to a human rights or employment law challenge. This is a big topic, so please enter a question in the Q&A if you would like more details about this. Once you've established that your job requirements are bona fide, keep the language in your job description simple. If you would like your job description or any other job-related document, such as your employee handbook, to be accessible to someone with an intellectual disability, there is a charity called People First that has a plain language committee that can be hired to translate documents into plain language. Their website is peoplefirstofcanada.ca, and a link to the website is being posted in the chat. There is also a free job description resource available on the Hire for Talent website at hirefortalent.ca, which is also going to be posted in the chat. I think they should come through. There they are. Great, thank you. Next slide, please. Now that you've got your inclusive job description, you are all ready for the next step of posting the role. Here is an opportunity to set the tone by including your amazing inclusivity statement. There are other ways to set the tone and let people know clearly that your process is inclusive, such as offering the option for accommodation right in your job posting. Every applicant has a right to this under human rights legislation anyways, so why not promote that you offer it and stand out from the crowd? Offer multiple ways to apply. Some job seekers might not have access to a computer, and some websites are not designed to be used with assistive technologies, such as screen readers. Offering a phone number, an email address, or a mailing address can open up more options. Use the plain language skills we learned about a few minutes ago. And as I learned again from Mark Wafer, state right in the job posting that we hire people with disabilities. It sends a powerful signal that people with disabilities will see and respond to. It takes the guesswork out of the process for them. Before you post the ad, do a flip test. Think of how you might read the posting if you were someone else. Look for words, jargon, acronyms, industry-specific terms, or expectations that might unintentionally eliminate candidates. Once you are ready to post the ad, review where you typically post your jobs. If you only post your positions on websites, as I mentioned a moment ago, some websites are not designed to be used with assistive technologies, such as screen readers, and are therefore inaccessible to certain users. Employers interested in tapping into the talents of candidates with disabilities can contact community organizations and recruiters that can offer assistance on reaching these candidates. In the conference board report I referenced at the beginning of the webinar, they mention a survey done by the Bank of Montreal in which more than half of the employers surveyed reported never having hired someone with a disability despite recognizing the business benefits. The main reason cited was that they do not know how to recruit them. The BMO study recommended that employers must remove barriers preventing a person with disabilities from applying and must better identify themselves as organizations with policies and practices to accommodate people with disabilities. Once again, Hire for Talent has a free resource on their website on how to write an inclusive job posting that will be posted in the chat. And again, you do not have to do any of this on your own. There are lots of resources, organizations, and employment service providers that are ready and eager to help. Next slide, please. We've covered off 4 key parts of an inclusive workplace framework that you can build on your foundation. And now I'm going to give you a brief bonus, accommodation plans. This is a big topic. We might call it a support beam because if you don't have it in place, other parts of the framework will likely start to sag. I'm only going to touch on it briefly today because in 2 weeks we have a webinar coming up dedicated to this one topic. Human rights legislation states that employers have a duty to accommodate employees with limitations due to a medical condition. An accommodation plan is any change in the work environment that allows a person with limitations in their abilities to do their job. Accommodation plans can be temporary, periodic, or long-term, depending on the employee's medical condition. An accommodation plan can be used for interviews, new hires, and existing employees. In our accommodation plan webinar on Tuesday, August 25, we'll explore further what bona fide job requirements are and what undue hardship means. You will also receive a free accommodation plan template to help guide you. Next slide, please. And finally, before we dive into your questions, as Mark Wafer and Nike have said, just do it. Not everything has to be perfect. You will make mistakes and learn as you go along, just as you do with every employee. If you model that your workplace is welcoming, accepting, and understanding, then you'll have a workplace culture that can deal with failure when you don't get it quite right every time. If you have the right foundational attitude and behaviors that we covered at the beginning of the webinar and work away at the framework pieces we've covered, the rest will fall into place. So before I turn it over to Belinda to facilitate answering your questions, I have one for you. What is one thing that you are willing to commit to today that will help you get started in creating a more inclusive workplace? During the Q&A, I would love it if you would put your ideas in the chat. And now I'm going to turn it back to Belinda to facilitate the Q&A.
Thank you, Suanne. I told you she had a wealth of knowledge and information. That was fantastic. Thanks so much for sharing that. I had some great feedback. Some people just saying, wonderful, thank you very much. Suanne, the question someone just asked was, could you talk a little bit more about the webinar that you were just referencing? Can you talk a little bit about the August 25th?
Sure. So on August 25, we are doing a webinar specifically on accommodation plans. And I will be covering some of those technical aspects that I mentioned about bona fide job descriptions, how and when to disclose, and undue hardship. And then I actually have a guest speaker his name is Mark Wafer. I already referred to him, but he is going to join us and answer some real life questions to help you understand better what accommodation plans look like in the workplace and what he has come across in his experience. And then we will again have a time for Q&A, and we've developed a free template for you to help you through the accommodation plan process if you would like to be able to document your accommodation plans.
Excellent, thank you. There are some questions around how you can register. I will be sharing a slide near the end of this presentation that has the direct link to register at that point in time. So again, it's August 25th. We'll be sharing the link during this presentation, so you'll be able to register, and it'll be Suanne and Mark Wafer sharing some of his extensive professional experience in working with diverse workforces. People are also expressing an interest in a little bit more information around inclusive job descriptions. Do you want to talk a little bit more about what will be included in the Inclusive Hiring Practices Toolkit that's coming out in November?
Sure. So inclusive job descriptions, you can start with your existing job description and just read through it and look at the requirements for the role. And there are different resources online. Example, Hire for Talent that I've mentioned a few times. They have an employer's guide for how to write inclusive job descriptions. But it's looking at everything that you require for the role and determining whether or not only is it really required, but how is it worded? So are you asking, sort of an example might be, are you putting in there that someone has to be able to type 60 words a minute? Well, these days you don't actually have to type, right? Like there are assistive devices to help people that cannot type. So making sure that the wording in your job description is not excluding potential candidates. Again, there are resources. It's hard to sort of give one answer that applies to all job descriptions, but that would be an example of how to, the kind of things to look for.
Excellent, thank you, Suanne. And as you mentioned earlier, there are employment specialists. There are agencies within your communities who have experience around job design, job carving, and are able to kind of let you take a step back right from the beginning at how you're thinking about the job overall in your job description and your posting. So that's excellent. Lots of positive feedback, just so you know, Suanne, lots of thanks and appreciation for the great work. We have had a request for the PowerPoint, so I've indicated that we will send that. There will be a follow-up email coming out and we will include that. And again, just lots of thanks and appreciation for what you've provided today.
So where are people's commitments to what they're going to do? I was hoping somebody might put something in the chat.
Yeah, I haven't seen any yet. So Suanne is offering up a challenge if anyone's brave enough to send me in the chat what your first step is in taking this information and going forward with it.
If you're an employer and you don't have an inclusivity statement, that is a great, as I said earlier, it's a great place to start, because you can Google inclusivity statements. You can look at some of the companies you like and admire. And while I don't promote plagiarizing, you can definitely take some of the ideas that you're seeing and very easily create one sentence, two sentences, just something that makes a statement that your business is committed to inclusivity.
We have a couple coming in now. So
Okay.
We've saying they're committing to creating an inclusivity statement. I love this one from Caroline. She's going to ask her staff what they want and need. A beautiful starting spot. And also just a point of clarification, you probably can't write in the chat, but anything that you want to share with Suanne, you can just write in the Q&A and I can see that and then share it with her. And then Robin just sharing with us that she's happy to share the information with her organization and all of the employers that she supports and works with.
Great.
Excellent.
And
anyone else? Yeah.
I was going to say, if there are employers on the line, if you do not currently have hire someone with disabilities, look around in your community and find a business that does, and just have a coffee with that business owner, find out how they got started. because sometimes it's the fear of the unknown that can hold us back, and there's really nothing to fear. So.
Excellent. I have some other ones popping in now. There's a commitment to keep on promoting hiring persons with disabilities. So people are starting to sort of take consideration around what it is they want to do with some of the information you've shared today. So we'll just leave just a couple more seconds here. Oh, we have one that's come in from Sean. Sean is a Native person who works with Ethics Canada on the ethics and research. We've had over 20 eagles fly over our schools. And I just lost Sean. He got bumped in his wonderful. Sorry, Sean.
You know, it went to the top. I think somebody liked it, so it bumped up to the top.
That's great. Thanks so much. We had over 20 eagles fly over our schools as we worked with inclusion. Why would 20 eagles fly over our communities for many years? Thank you for your support, Megawitch. Thank you. Thank you very much. So a broad group of participants with us today. And then as an employment agency, Annabelle is sharing that we will search out some samples of inclusivity statements to actually share with their employers to help them consider how they could develop some, which is an excellent idea. Thank you. So I'm just doing a quick double check, but that seems to be most of our answers for you for today, Suanne. Any final thoughts before I wrap up?
Just again, thank you to everyone for participating. It's amazing to see so many people interested in this topic, and I hope that everyone is also eager to see the Employers Toolkit that's coming out in November. We're putting a lot of work into that, so I trust that it's going to be a very useful resource for you. So thank you, and I hope to see you again in 2 weeks.
Thank you so much, Suanne, for your time. If we can go to the next slide. Excellent, thanks so much. Suanne, again, you've shared a wealth of information. I can see by the questions and the comments and everything coming in, the deep appreciation that's there for that. But it is a lot for people to digest, and we welcome people to take some time and to reach out if they have follow-up questions. But an excellent launch to our MentorAbility National Series. For everyone who attended today, you will receive a follow-up email from CASE, and it contains a couple of important items. First, we're offering you a tip sheet based on Suanne's content today. This resource is available for you in English, French, and plain language. And based on a request from our participants today, we will also include a copy of today's PowerPoint. Second, we ask that you kindly follow the link that's provided in that email. It connects you with our feedback survey. And your feedback is extremely valuable to us and can help us to shape future sessions. We would like to remind you that CASE's national conference is happening virtually this year in October, and the title of the conference is Employment First. And we have an exceptional lineup of speakers, so we invite you to check out the speakers and more information around what's featured and offered at supportedemployment.ca. Next slide, please. We hope you will join us for our next webinar on August 25th with Mark Wafer and Suanne Miedema. There were some questions around how do I register for that. Please note you can register for this at www.supportedemployment.ca/MentorAbility webinar series. It's in the yellow bar right at the bottom of the slide. And we will send the link out as well in your follow-up email. So during August 25th, Mark Wafer and Suanne Miedema are going to take a deep dive into accommodations. And if you're participating, you'll also receive a free accommodation template. Until next time, everyone, this is Belinda Dienick, thanking you for participating on behalf of the MentorAbility Canada team. Have a great day.